Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, today's video, we are going to be talking about everything you need to know about wall decor. So this is a very common question where people don't know what to do with their walls because they're tired of the plain blank walls. You know, a big white wall, big blank wall, it's just got a world of possibilities, but sometimes we don't know what to do with it, and so we just leave it blank. Sure, but if your walls are boring, it's probably not gonna look that interesting. Let's get going. Okay, first up on my list, when talking about beautiful wall decor, is going to be texture and dimension. Having something really interesting on those walls makes a massive difference in creating a beautiful space. Oftentimes people really love to do the sexy stuff, and that oftentimes means going to Home Goods or going to Target and just sort of throwing some stuff in the cart and going, oh, this is cute, and then chucking it in their space and going, but why doesn't this all work together? Yes, I want to rethink what it means to put art on your walls, because not everything necessarily needs to be like, heaven forbid, an art piece that you found when you were shopping at Target. You did what I said you shouldn't do, and you went and you started shopping and you picked up some generic wall art while you were there. Well, art should feel personal. It should feel something that really speaks to you, and I think you should get really creative in terms of what you choose to call art, because I think there's some really beautiful pieces out there. You can turn, old postcards that you find, you can take prints that you thrifted, you can take other people's dead relatives that you find at a garage sale, and you can frame that sucker and you can throw that on the wall. That's interesting. Pieces, thrift them, fine. They got rid of it and they shouldn't have, and he rescued all these rolls of things and sat in his basement for 50 years. And then I repurposed it and I had it professionally framed and now it's gorgeous and makes sense for your space. Also be creative with things like 3D things as well. Like, so you could have sculptural pieces that make sense to put on your walls. That's really cool. People are embracing different forms of wall decor that are much more textural than we saw before, which I think is really neat. Definitely on trend because we're seeing so much more texture everywhere. Why not on your walls? Okay, everything you need to know about walls. How high to hang things. Okay, additionally, art should be like somewhere in the 57 to 60 inches above from the ground to the middle of the art, or maybe 4 to 6 inches or so above a sofa or a sideboard or a side table or whatever you got going on there, some sort of case goods. If you decide to put like art above it or something, aim for about 6 inches or so. But here's the thing, it really depends on a bunch of different factors. So there is no hard and fast rule. The size of the art matters, okay? If it's huge and it's taking up a big chunk of the wall, 57 to 60 might not make sense. If you've got really low furniture, 4 to 6 inches above might not make sense. It might just be way too low, and you might want to go a little bit taller. Maybe something more like 10 inches might make sense. It depends on a bunch of different factors, but that's a loose guideline. The point is, though, is that it should be roughly in the scale of the rest of the space. So if you have super tall ceilings, having larger art probably is going to make more sense because it's going to look more proportional to the rest of the wall, right? Just work with like almost like a rule of 2/3, okay? Something should take up roughly 2/3 of whatever it's sort of centered against. Now let's move on to gallery walls. Okay, a gallery wall is 100% an option, and I gave this its own category because I know you're gonna do one. The biggest tip with gallery walls, you guys, is first of all, take into account the whole gallery wall when deciding the space and the size of it versus the rest of the wall. Okay, so you might be inclined to go, here's a little photo, and we're gonna put this in my gallery wall, and that feels like it makes sense for the size of the wall, but take into account the whole gallery wall experience. Treat it like it's one piece of art, then work with that when deciding sort of the size and scale that will make sense for the space. Because so often people overcrowd these things because they're like, but it's not that big of a deal because they're just tiny little pieces. Yes, but when you put 50 tiny little pieces on a wall, it starts to feel really overwhelming, and you're starting to hang things like from the ceiling, and they're right there hugging up against the baseboards, and that's maybe a little bit much. I would say define the space, make sure that the whole gallery wall is taken into account when choosing how much space it should take up. But if you want something that leans more eclectic, choose varying things. Things like three-dimensional things are really fun to mix into to a gallery wall. You don't just have to stick to picture frames just because that feels like it necessarily makes sense. You can also incorporate all those different art pieces that I talked about, like things not being spaced properly between them, allowing a sufficient amount of white space for each individual piece to breathe, while also not too much so that it doesn't, like, it looks like it's all part of the same collection. Again, with walls, having said now, we've got mirrors, we've got textured art, we've got tapestries, we've got gallery walls, we've got wainscoting. I mean, I have given you so many ideas on what to do with your walls. You're like, Nick, but I don't know. I don't have enough walls. And that's true. You honestly, once you realize the wild world of walls, at the beginning, you're like, I don't know what to do with any of these walls. And by the end, you're like, I have too many things I want to do and not enough walls to do them on. It just becomes that much fun. Because there's like, honestly, you can get really creative. And if you're going high end, you're doing a whole renovation, you could do walls that are made out of freaking stone. Like you can put natural stone on there. You can put like wood. There's so many different interesting materials and wallpapers and things you can do. It's so much fun. So you are going to have a lot of time with walls. But my last tip for you is going to be the opposite of all that, which is to say, not every wall needs to be filled. There is also importance to making sure that you have enough negative space in your home. So what is positive space? What is negative space? Oh yeah, positive space is where you have things that are taking up space, right? So the art that we're talking about, those tapestries, all that stuff is positive space. It's adding to the room. Negative space is the absence of all that stuff. When there's too much negative space, it feels a little cold, it feels a little boring. That would obviously lean more towards minimalism. But in my experience, sometimes that, having all negative space and no positive space can feel a bit insane asylum, right? So when everything is positive space though, it can feel cluttered and overwhelming. So negative space is also really important. So that negative space I talked about in between those gallery wall photos, that's negative space, right? So when I say space to breathe, that's what we're talking about. But the same is true for the whole, is to leave some space blank so that everything has room to breathe. You have room to breathe. It doesn't feel overwhelming, never feels cluttered, and overall it creates a more balanced space because you've got positive space happening, you've got negative, and everything sort of works harmoniously together to create something really gorgeous. So don't think that everything needs to be filled, but also don't leave everything blank. This video had a lot of vagueness of like, don't do this or this. The answer lies somewhere in the middle, but that's the nature of walls, Like, I'm sorry, and that's design. There's an art and science to it. So good luck with that. But yeah, I would say don't fill everything with every surface needs a thing. Not every table needs decor. Not every wall needs art. Not everything needs everything. Sometimes things can just be, and that creates a balanced, harmonious space that you're going to love. So definitely negative space is important. Okay.